Welcome to this webinar about the fundamentals of peer review for reviewers. This discussion will be presented by two of Biomaterials Editors, Professor Abe Pandit and Henry Yu. Thank you both for sharing your editors' views on the topic. My name is Marina Suarzi Silva, and I am the publisher for the journal Biomaterials. Also joining us from Mendeley Communities is my colleague Sophie de Koning. This Publishing Campus and Materials Today supported webinar will consist of two short presentations. The first will focus on the importance of peer review and how to be a good reviewer. The second part will touch on tips to deliver referee reports, which are helpful for editors. We will be sharing your live questions with our editors at the end. Any questions we are unable to answer due to the time limit of the session, we will post on our Biomaterials Mendeley group on peer review. Before we start, I would like to briefly introduce you to this new group on Mendeley Communities. This group came to be from the need to provide current and prospective reviewers for biomaterials an opportunity to interact with our editors in a dynamic, live way beyond the peer review process itself. With this group on Mendeley, we hope to provide an opportunity for space and time independent direct interaction, a place for reviewers to ask practical or fundamental questions about their role in the peer review process. Sophie, our community manager, and myself connected with our colleagues James Picken on Publishing Campus. We teamed up to offer our members and anyone interested in peer review a live event providing editor tips for reviewers. Finally, Materials Today, our online platform that brings the material science community together, supported us with spreading the word about this webinar. I would now like to introduce Professor Abe Pandit for our first topic. Abe is Professor of Biomaterials at the National University of Ireland, Galway, and the Scientific Director of the Centre for Research in Medical Devices. His research is focused on controlled drug release to target injury mechanisms at the molecular and cellular levels. He has published over 210 papers in peer-reviewed journals. He is a Fellow of the Tissue Engineering and Regenerative International Society and an International Fellow in the Biomaterials Science and Engineering. Abe, please. Thank you.
Yes. So to understand a peer review, why does it really matter? We need to understand what the role of a journal is and how the manuscript contributes to the journal. The journal is a collective knowledge database. It communicates information. It validates the quality of research. It rewards contributions and ultimately builds a community. These 5 themes can only be effectively accomplished by a good peer review system. For researchers like you and me, it credits our own findings. It ensures quality and novelty and impact. Ultimately, it validates our own findings to the general field that we are in. The peers that we are in is all validated by a system of peer review. Peer review system is not only used by journals, it's also used by funding agencies which support our research. Typically in a funding agency, there are peer review panels which are brought in together to critique the proposals. The role of a peer review system in this case is to assess impact, novelty, and competitiveness of a proposal. So in many ways, this system of peer review in funding agencies is not that different than what is done in a manuscript, where impact, novelty, and a competitiveness of a manuscript is also gauged. Ultimately, it boils down to validation of the system. So ultimately, a manuscript forms a part of a collective knowledge database. Published papers often differ from initial submissions. Most of the time, these are considerably better. Ultimately, this betterment of manuscripts through a peer review system is betterment of the science that we publish. Peer review systems, as I said, are not limited to journals, but also funding agencies, but also are used as ratings in the industry. If you go to a restaurant, for example, it is often peer reviewed. You go to a hotel, it's also peer reviewed. Funding agencies, as I mentioned, also use it. It's also used in promotions. So, for example, the papers I publish are published in journals, and the journals I publish in are also used for my own promotion. And likewise, a peer review system is a universally accepted facet of life. So the first time I did my peer review was in 1995, when I was finishing my PhD. When I finished my PhD and I started working in the industry, I thought I should contribute to the field. Since my work was in wound healing and creating a tissue engineered template or a scaffold for wound healing, and I had published about 7 to 8 papers during my PhD, I felt I should approach those journals first and see whether I can peer review in those journals. This was the era where emails were not prominent, so I actually typed letters to the editors of to the 8 journals that I had published in before. One of them being PRS, Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, which is a premier journal for plastic surgeons. So I wrote to all of these editors saying, I'm a newbie. I have not reviewed before. I have assisted my advisor in reviewing process, and I'm happy to take this challenge on. So I wrote to about 8 journals, 8 editors, and I was pleasantly surprised one day to receive a brown packet on my desk which said, please review this manuscript, and there were 3 copies of those manuscripts on my desk. This was the era where you were actually delivered a hard copy of the manuscript, and you were given a form that you actually have to type out. I was overly thrilled when I got that when I got those, because it was something new. It's something my opinion actually mattered about something. And it was an incredible experience to read a manuscript and to really reflect on what it is to peer review. I wanted to make it a better piece of work. I felt I was contributing to the researchers it's more of a virtual experience as an anonymous peer reviewer, that I was someone in the background trying to help this manuscript being a better piece of work than it was. So it was really a very exciting experience, but also a humbling experience, because my opinion was going to be considered by the editor whether manuscript was accepted or not. So it was humbling in that context. It was exciting. My opinion mattered, and rewarding that I was able to contribute to the field. So that was my first experience, and my first experience is still quite a memorable experience, and that has paved my way to date to the other journals that I have embarked on. I mainly review manuscripts because the field is rapidly changing. There's lots of publications in the field, so I need to keep up to date with what is going on, to keep pulse with the field, and keep pulse with the system I'm in. So this reviewing process helps me to know what is current in the field. Since practice makes a person perfect, and the more I review, the better reviewer I am, and the better reviewer I am, the better author I become. More importantly, also, which is a sideline for me, also it is a recognition on my CV. To be a reviewer of biomaterials is a prestigious honor, and that has been regarded by my peers. You think, well, this X and Y Professor Pandit reviews for biomaterials is indeed an honor, and you also get certification from your peers for that purpose. I've definitely become a better author by the reviewing process. So when I've reviewed, I don't know, about 500, 700 manuscripts to date, I know what the reviewers are looking for. I know where they catch the common mistakes. I know how the data is to be presented. I know which figures tell a story. I know where the story begins and the story ends. So ultimately, a manuscript is like a story. How do you introduce your characters? How the characters tell their own story, and how the story ends. There's an art to that, and the art can only be understood, and one can only perfect that art or come close to perfection by reviewing more and more. I also have learned over the years to attract the readers to my manuscript. How do you create a scenario where the character engages you further into your story? How do you introduce every aspect of your work right up front and not give away too much at the same time? It's all in the details. Everything is about details, and the focus on details makes a manuscript a much better piece of work. Writing a good manuscript is an art by itself. Reviewing is also an art. All of these are an evolving piece. So I can never say that I'm a good reviewer or a good author, because it's all an evolving science, and it's all an education process at the end of the day. I get rejected all the time in the field of publishing, and that's a matter of acceptance that manuscripts are going to be rejected, and it's not necessarily got to do the work that I do. It's got to do with that manuscript. So the art of accepting rejection is also something I have learned better at. When I get a rejection, I just file it away somewhere else, and then go back after 2 days and see really why this was rejected, were there valid points made, and how can I become a better author. So by reviewing, I become a better author, and I become and this is all a cyclical process in the end of the day. So when I also review a good paper, you can do that, and I can know a good paper from a not so good paper in 5 minutes. That's because it's just a matter of looking at it, seeing how it's evolved, and this helps me become ultimately a better editor. So what is my role of a review as a reviewer? The role of a reviewer is to provide fair and unbiased comments on the quality and value of an article. The quality of the publication and the publication speed depends directly on the thoroughness and promptness of the individual reviewer. So the reviewer is one of the key stakeholders in the whole process of a manuscript publication. It's not necessarily the author. The reviewer is equally important. The stakeholders have placed a trust in me. The editor has, the author has, the reader has, and the publisher has. They depend on me as a reviewer to do a good job. Hence, the process of peer review requires complete transparency, impartiality, and confidentiality, and timeliness. The process depends, as I said, on trust. The quality and integrity of the entire scientific publishing enterprise depends on the quality and integrity of me, or me as a reviewer, which is why reviewers are at the heart of the scientific publication process. Me as a reviewer, without a reviewer, a manuscript is not published. So I play a very critical role in the publication of a manuscript. So when reviewing an article, a reviewer is asked to follow the journal and editor's guidelines. There are certain guidelines that have to be met. And one is asked to follow what those guidelines are meant to be. And I have to provide a collegial, constructive report with evidence-based comments. Ultimately, this review is about improving science. It's not about the individual who wrote the manuscript or the group of individuals who wrote the manuscript. So constructive report helps the science to be better. And my review has to be evidence-based as much as the manuscript is meant to be evidence-based. So it's a response to the evidence that was presented and the evidence that a reviewer has to refute or to accept the argument that's presented is very critical in the reviewing process. I, as a reviewer, also need to make a very clear recommendation or where does this manuscript actually stand. And I need to deliver this on time because ultimately there are people waiting for this. The author, if I'm the author, I'm waiting eagerly what is the future of this manuscript or whether I should publish to some other journal or what is the future of it. It is utmost important for me as a reviewer to treat all manuscripts in the same manner as my own manuscript would be treated. So in other words, if I'm in a bad mood, I look at it the next day. If I'm in a better mood to review, then I review it. So every manuscript has to be treated in the same way. Good manuscripts only emerge by the quality of reviewers. So finally, I review to improve the manuscript than to critique. My role as a reviewer is to improve and not to critique. The goal is to improve the work published for the sake of the authors, readers, and science overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe, for your very inspiring personal story. So it's also my pleasure to introduce Biomaterials Editor Professor Yu. Henry Yu is a professor of mechanobiology and physiology at the National University of Singapore. He was trained as a cell biologist in the US and Germany, and he has published more than 160 papers and co-founded 3 companies. Henry frequently consults for international agencies and organizations, has founded or chaired 3 PhD programs, and has mentored several PhD students and postdocs who have built successful careers in academy and industry. He has also been a visiting professor at the MIT. So Henry, please go ahead and take over.
Thank you. So I will dive a little bit deeper into the process of peer review. First, when you receive an invitation from editor to review a paper, there are several questions I would ask as a potential reviewers. Am I comfortable that I have the expertise to help the editors and eventually the authors to improve the article? And do I have enough time in the next 2 weeks or so to review the papers and submit a report? There's all those issues about the conflict of interest. One of the criteria for determining whether there's a conflict of interest is that whether I have collaborated with the authors of the papers in the past 2 to 3 years. Do I have affiliations in the same institutions as one or more authors? The system sometimes can identify such conflict of interest, but not always. So therefore, we try to gauge ourselves whether there is a conflict of interest. Am I competing with the author for the works to be reviewed? This is a very important criteria. One thing to think about this is that would I be tempted to use the data or the information in the papers for my own research before it's published? In other words, am I in the positions to present an unbiased view to analyze the strengths and weakness of the paper? When I receive an invitation, I usually would, as a reviewers, potential reviewers, I receive an abstract to help me to make decisions regarding whether I understand the research or not. And editor usually in biomaterials gives the potential reviewers 5 days to make such a decision, after which the system will withdraw the invitation. If a potential reviewer accepts the invitation, you can log into the system and get a copy of the PDF files to review the papers. Editors usually give reviewers 14 days to review the paper. Slightly before the deadline, you will start receiving reminders from the system. Depending on when the editor receives the reviewer's comments back, if there are enough reviews, the systems will terminate invitations. But usually before the system does that, I will send personal emails to the potential reviewers to give them 1 to 2 days to submit their reviews in case they've already done the work. Or they will tell me that please go ahead and make a decision. For the reviews that's long overdue, the systems will terminate the invitation without asking the review. Editors know exactly who the reviewers are, but such information is kept confidential from the authors or anyone else unless reviewers ask editors to reveal their identity. There are different review processes. You can find it out on the website. There are single-blinded review, double-blind, open reviews, more transparent reviews, and other newer peer review processes that are evolving nowadays. I would usually send out about 10 reviewers invitations, and with another 10 as a backup, in case all 10 potential reviewers turn down my invitation. Others, the system will automatically invite one at a time to fill up the slots. The process would usually continue until at least 2 to 3 informative reviews are received. The usual period of receiving the papers to making a decision, usually the whole process for biomaterials, it takes about 2 to 4 weeks. This is quite fast, actually, nowadays. There might be another few days for managing editors to test the paper for whether there is a plagiarism and to assign the papers to the handling editor, such as me. The editor will make decisions based on reviews. The usual decision for making such a decision is either to accept the paper, to ask the authors to have a major revision or minor revisions, reject the papers, or reject with encouragement, which is interesting features for biomaterials journals. Rejecting the paper with encouragement is similar to major revision, except the reviewers expect the authors to perform significant amount of additional experiments or restructuring the story beyond 2 to 4 weeks' time. So therefore, when it's rejected, it will be removed from the systems. Therefore, the authors can take their time to revise the manuscript and then resubmit the papers. In such a case, usually the editors would want the authors to provide the original manuscript numbers and line by line or item by item response to the reviewer's critique and comments. The decision for rejecting a paper with encouragement is only for the editors to make. If a reviewer wants to express such opinions that this is a good paper, but there are significant experiments need to be done, what they can do is that they can usually make a comment in the review saying that XYZ experiments is absolutely necessary to satisfy me as a reviewer. What constitutes a good review? Professor Abe has actually talked quite a bit about the principles of what constitutes a good review. We also see in the biomaterials peer review Mendeley debate rooms, there are some comments and question and answers by Professor Mao Haiquan in Johns Hopkins University. And he provided 3 tips for a good review. One is A good review should be very specific, should provide actionable items that usually improve the quality of the papers. Second is please provide comments on whether the work is potentially impactful. This is a very difficult question, what constitutes impact. Even though novelties can be an important element to judge impact, biomaterials journals often publishes work that is incremental. But the incremental work must provide significant additional insight into an important problem. The insight can be fundamental discovery in mechanism studies or demonstrated applications that something you develop truly works. In other words, a work is impactful either because it is something so fundamental or widely applicable that is worth quoting in a textbook. Some of the examples on the technology side, for example, recently there's been a lot of papers and discussions about the CRISPR-Cas genome editing or optogenetics, or in the case of biomaterials and tissue engineering, for the past few years has been interesting work on deserialized matrix. Such works has wide applications, has wide impact beyond a particular problem or systems. Or sometimes a study is dealing with a very specific, relatively narrow applications. But in such a case, you really have to demonstrate the solution to a particular specific problem is working with evidence, demonstrating that it is working. There's another issues about the impact, looking for demonstrated in papers on mechanisms. Increasingly, we see papers in biomaterials and tissue engineering kind of area that is trying to provide insight into how things work. For the mechanism papers, reviewers can gauge the impact by commenting on the hypothesis. Is the hypothesis well phrased? That is, it's easy to understand whether a hypothesis is potentially significant. Are the data or the storyline purely descriptive of some observations, or is analytical or quantitative enough to provide insight into how things work? For example, there are certain correlative stories to correlate an output to an input. For example, you take a cells and grow onto certain substrate with certain features. That's the input. And then it leads to a output. The cells becomes larger or proliferate more or get differentiated, which is output. There is increasing tendencies for the mechanism paper to just have such correlative input and output. And we increasingly look for mechanistic insight into how the input is linked causally into the output. The third point that, another point that Professor Mao has highlighted, and I elaborate a little bit more, is how do the data support the claims in the paper? That's a very important information that the reviewers in the expert domain can provide help to the editors to make decisions on. Biomaterials is different from some of the news-chasing journals. Here, we care more about whether there's sufficient evidence in the data and analysis to support the claims. It's not just novel, it's not just fancy, it's not just trendy, but whether there's enough information to support the claims. So the quality and the thoroughness of the data and the credibility of the claims are substantiated, not just throwing out a concept with a little bit of preliminary data. One more point I would like to add is that Biomaterials publishes papers in a loosely defined areas of biomaterials relevant research. So nowadays you see increasing papers which seemingly have little to do with development of new materials or chemical synthesis or even devices. There are quite a number of biological papers in cancer research, in stem cell research, in nanomedicines, in various aspects of research somehow related to biomaterials. For example, and also those studies in the developmental biology, regenerations, or in a very engineering kind of approach to develop devices. For the reviewers, you're welcome to comment on whether the paper falls within the scope of the journal, but please leave the scope decision to the editors. Often I receive reviewers' comment rejecting a paper, otherwise very good paper, simply saying that this has, in my view, has very little to do with biomaterials. And so it would be more helpful if you actually ignore the scope issue and just comment on the scientific aspect. In the debate room, we have quite some discussions regarding the time the editor expects reviewers to spend on reviewing a paper. This has something to do with your reading speed and how relevant the paper is close to your expertise and how well the paper is written. The better the paper is written, according to accepted norms in the field, the more you know about the paper, the faster it is for you to review a paper. Usually it takes me roughly 1 to 2 hours to read a paper a couple of times, and another 1 to 2 hours to write a review report. It is useful to understand where certain informations are placed in certain sections of the paper. For example, I would usually glance through the abstract to know roughly what the paper is all about. Then I glance through the first part of the introduction to understand the bigger problem statement and why certain field is important or not important. And then the last part of the introduction, and then jump to the last part of the discussions and the conclusions to understand how the authors have claimed to have solved a particular problem and its potential impact. Then I would go to the figures and captions to get an idea whether the data is of high quality and whether they are sufficiently thorough and with certain depth to support the claims. With this kind of a quick read, I will make a preliminary assessment on whether the paper is impactful enough to be further evaluated. I then take a side of whether the paper I want the paper to be further evaluated by myself and by others or against the paper. Taking a position helps me to search for further evidences for or against the paper in a second reading of the paper. This time I will read it from the beginning to the end. I can switch my positions after the second read. If I do switch side, I will do another read thoroughly from the beginning to the end. Once I confirm the position with enough evidence, I would make a recommendation to accept, to recommend a major revision or minor revision or reject. Then I start writing the review report. During the writing process, I might have to go back to the paper or some additional background papers. Then I will finish. It will help me to finish writing a good review. Remember, the good review is the one that helps editors to make a decision based on your expert assessment of the impact and potentially helps the author to improve the paper if you recommend revision. The good reviewer is someone who has the time and expertise to complete a useful report in 2 to 4 weeks time, and sometimes even faster if you do it right. Now I turn to Marina to talk about other reviewers' recognitions and support platforms and the programs that the publishers provide.
Thank you, Henry. Very clear insight on the actual peer review process for a reviewer. And thanks again to both our editors for sharing their testimonies. Before we move on for the Q&A, I would just like to finalize by tying together the importance of reviewers in the peer review process and how we can best help them to deliver good reports. At the journal Biomaterials, our editors are particularly invested in creating opportunities to improve their reviewers' experiences with peer review. For the past year, we have been working on ways to provide our reviewers with resources, recognition, and reviewer mentorship whenever possible. Resources include initiatives like the Biomaterials Peer Review Debate Room on Mendeley, which you have heard about already a couple of times, where either editors or us share general guidelines with our reviewers. We're working actually on specific biomaterials reviewer guidelines to be shared soon, so stay tuned. And we will also try to post these on the journal homepage of Biomaterials. For recognition, actually, we have joined the reviewer recognition platform, which provides certificates and to reviewers and editors the journal the opportunity to nominate excellent reviewers. We are working on expanding this so that we can turn it into some sort of recognition award this year. And in addition to that, and already mentioned several times, we have also joined the Volunteer to Review pilot, which allows researchers to directly register their interest to review for the journal and to share their motivation on why they would like to review. So this ties in a little bit with what Professor Pandit mentioned in terms of reaching out to editors of the journals directly. So we are now trying to make this very organized by giving people the opportunity to directly register with the journal to do so. So instead of sending a written letter, you can actually volunteer to review via the journal homepage of Biomaterials. But most important, actually, is to hear from you, the reviewers, what can we do to help you have the best experience during the peer review process, and how can we help you to become better reviewers? So I'm looking forward to your thoughts. So share those with us during the Q&A and also afterwards on our Mendeley group. But now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Sophie so that she can get our questions and answers started.
Okay. Thank you, Marina. Also, Epe and Henry, thank you for you all very much. That was very informative. Hi, everyone. This is Sophie, the Community Manager for the Biomaterials Peer Review Group on Mendeley. During the presentations, I was monitoring the questions that came in. You have all submitted quite some questions, so thank you for that. Luckily, we have a good 20 minutes or so left for these. So I will start reading them out, and depending on the topic of the question, direct them either to the editors, Epe and Henry, or to Marina, publisher of the journal. So for the first question, there seemed to be a general theme actually amongst two questions, which was really what qualifies someone to be a peer reviewer, and as a second question, how do I become a peer reviewer? So for the first one, what qualifies someone to be a peer reviewer? Epe, what are your thoughts on that?
So a good peer reviewer is an ongoing process, but to be a reviewer first, one needs to have published some manuscripts in the field. An average of at least 5 to 7 manuscripts would be a good hallmark, as the senior author paper on any manuscript will be a good starting point. So what I would advise, if those who have not done so, is also work with your supervisors or advisors or your colleagues in helping them peer review the process. So at least you learn the basics of peer reviewing or hands-on experience as an assistant with your advisors or your colleagues who are actively peer reviewing. So the short answer for this is that one needs to publish a few papers or as a lead author first to at least have some credibility in reviewing, because one would have gone through the process.
Thank you very much, Abe. Just as a side question to that, so having published an average of 5 to 7 manuscripts, but do you have to have a PhD degree, or is it okay if you're still a PhD student to become a reviewer?
You don't have to have a PhD. You could be working in the industry for 20 years and you could have potentially published quite a few papers yourself without having a PhD. It's not about a PhD per se. It's more about knowing the art of publishing and also understanding what a review involves and your ability to critique and to give a constructive criticism of a manuscript is more critical than a PhD.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Henry. How does one become a peer reviewer? What is the best way to go about becoming one?
Well, we had a lengthy discussions in the debate room about these things. Basically, there are roughly two approaches. One, actually, Abe has already commented. If you publish enough papers, well, not necessarily a lot, but enough papers, then if your expertise is in certain areas, the editors were based on recommendations from the authors or simply searching the system for expertise and or for those topics that the editor is familiar with, they know you and such, then they will recommend you to invite you to review a paper. And there's another way that many younger people is wondering how they can be invited as a reviewers. I mean, if you believe you have certain expertise in certain areas, you can actually send a request with some evidence to that you know the topics by just writing emails to one of the handling editors. And sometimes when we believe you, we will ask you, we will add you to the systems, and then we will invite you as well. So especially for people in the U.S., often there's a tendency for some postdocs wanting to apply for immigration and this and that. They need to have enough papers that review by them. So they would often just directly send emails to one of the editors, and then we can add them to the systems if they demonstrate enough evidence. So those are roughly the two kinds of approach one can become a reviewer. And I think at some point, Biomaterials has been setting up programs to train potential reviewers. In such a case, there are various mechanisms that your supervisor can recommend, or your friends can recommend. And again, you have to provide some evidence you are a scientist in the relevant areas of research, and then you can be further trained.
Thank you, Henry. This is Marina here. I just wanted to add to your overview of how you could become a reviewer. I think what you explained, indeed, the fact that you can reach out to the editors is one of the ways as a younger researcher that you can get the opportunity to review a manuscript, and that's exactly the spirit of the Volunteer to Review pilot that Biomaterials joined. It's basically we want to concentrate all that information that comes independently from individual reviewers to our editors that generally come via email. Instead of gathering that information via loose emails, we are trying to really consolidate that information in a full database that we can provide to our editors with this volunteer to review. So basically we just expand on that idea, which you have already mentioned, which is a very good one, to voluntarily reaching out to our editors, and we try to compile that information and provide that to our editors. So I can tell you that since we've joined the program in May last year, we got from May to October about 200 plus people registering, which is really nice because these were people across the world, across all levels of experience that were eager to review for biomaterials. And we have shared now with our editors the motivations that they have to review for the journal. So please register if you're interested, and our editors might choose you if you have the appropriate expertise, but certainly having your motivation up front will help a lot, I think.
Okay, thank you, Marina, Henry. Next question comes from came in through the chat by Aslan. The question is directed at Ape. You believe all manuscripts should be treated in the same way, but they are obviously not written the same. The quality may differ significantly. How do you suggest to encounter low quality works?
Well, you treat the way you look at manuscripts the same way before you look at the manuscript, is what I meant. So, if I have two papers in front of me, I'm going to look at it the same way as I look at the other one. So if there is low quality work, it is low quality work, and if it is high quality work, it is high quality work. And you have a standard that's already established in the journal as a quality of work, and then you base the incoming manuscript on that quality of where it stands. So you're basically normalizing how you're looking at a manuscript. And if a manuscript is not hypothesis driven, or there's no mechanism, or it's very clear to one, to when you look at the manuscript, what are the shortcomings of a manuscript, or what are the strengths. I mean, if they've done very detailed analysis of something really unique, new material per se, then then this is exciting work. So it's exciting. Or it's talking about a new application which has never been explored before with a new material, then or even if it's an old material with a very, very new avenue of application, then that's potentially exciting. You keep the same hat on all the way through, and you standardize how you look at things.
Great, Ape. Thank you very much. As a next question, a really good question from Radu that came in. Some manuscripts come from a multidisciplinary approach in the subject. Should a reviewer say that his review is on the part of the manuscript that he has experience in and leave the rest to the other reviewers, or reject the reviewer invitation entirely? I think this is a good one for Henry.
Yeah, this is a very good question. We would many people. It is impossible for all the people to be knowledgeable about all things nowadays, with so many interdisciplinary articles and work. So as long as you can provide your own insight, and people like me who have been doing interdisciplinary research in many different disciplines, so we can synthesize the individual fields, reviewers' comments, and then we can make additional decisions based on that. But what we are lacking for people like me is the expert domain knowledge in one particular field in depth. So therefore, we really appreciate even though your own expertise in a particular area in an interdisciplinary topic, but those in-depth knowledge are very useful for the editors. So basically, the short answer is that yes, please write in. Please provide as much detail as you are capable. And we do see some of the reviewers comment telling me that I can only comment on this aspect of things. For example, there's a paper about a virus reactions to a material, and the virologist would tell me that, I'm sorry, my comments are only about the virus, not having anything to do with the materials. So then such information and comments would be very helpful to me.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Next question. You mentioned that if there is disagreement amongst the reviewers about manuscripts, that a third reviewer has to be consulted. Does this happen often?
You're asking me?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes. So the question was, Henry.
Okay.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So in fact, what we do is we send out actually a lot of review invitations to different people of different disciplines, and then for people who reply us, if usually our rule of thumb is that if I have 2 to 3 high quality reviews, then a decision can be made. So, but sometimes, not very often, when we send out about 10 or 20 invitations, there's only 1 or 2 people who actually give not so good comment. In such a case, we have to delay the process and invite additional reviewers. Out of let's say 100, maybe I would encounter about 2 to 3 such case. Hopefully, this gave you a sense. So in such a case, there will be a delay in the review process. But we try not to delay it.
Okay, thank you very much. A question that came in from Mahesh. She's saying that they enjoyed the webinar very much, by the way, which is nice to hear. Thank you. The question is, how does a reviewer check for plagiarism? Especially since there's so much data out there, how does one take this into account? I think this is a good one for Abe.
So there's multiple ways for checking for plagiarism. One is there are tools available to us where we look at words, and we can look at how things are written, and we can cross-check them fairly easily. Now that's easily done. The tricky one is data plagiarism, where there's graphs or where there is numbers or images that could have been plagiarized, and that and most of the times a good reviewer would have researched the area well enough to know that this data appeared before. So, for example, I had a misfortune or a fortune to review a paper about 3-4 years ago where the author had plagiarized themselves, which often happens, is that they had used the same data that they had used before in some other paper which they had published a couple of years ago, and they had represented the same data again. And I was reviewing it. I looked at the previous work, and I found, oh my goodness, this graph looks exactly the same. Same standard deviations means everything as the same one, and all they had added was another new line on the graph. And I had reported that to the editor and that's exactly what constitutes plagiarism. Self-plagiarism is often seen in this case, and this may very well be very innocent in nature, but it's still plagiarism. So a good reviewer will do their homework in looking at what's in the field and understand how things have been modified accordingly.
Thank you very much, Abe. Final question, because we do not have much more time left, for Henry. This question came in from Shahriar. Why is the name of the author shown in the manuscript? Because for biomaterials we have single blind peer review. Is it not fair that shouldn't the author's name basically? basically be hidden for the reviewer?
Well, it's a decision to adopt this kind of single-blind review process by the publishers, I guess. And there are merits and problems with each types of the peer review process. Theoretically, a double-blind process would be fairer in terms of ignoring who the author is. So therefore, you will pay equal amount of attention to the papers and such. The reality is that they are even though when I review the paper or as editor I try to screen the paper, I will usually don't look at who the reviewers are, who the authors are. I would look at the paper by itself. But having an understanding of the authors, if those authors, from the authors list, you can actually check what their previous papers are, and by doing so, you actually can think about the papers in the context of its own history of the development. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier, especially the comments from Professor Mao Chen in Johns Hopkins, that biomaterials do not just publish the first in its kind work. Often we will publish incremental work which would follow up on the previous work and eventually builds up enough momentum to make an impact to the field. So in such a case, having the insight of who the authors are and what they have done before and can give you a sense how to evaluate the current paper better. Of course, I mean, there are situations in the screening of the paper. If the work comes from a lab which has been traditionally doing very high quality work, and this paper is a borderline case. Not every paper from a good lab is always good. So if we look at the paper by itself without looking at the authors, and we find that it's borderline, I have a hard time deciding whether to give them a chance to be reviewed or not. And in this case, there are some bias. This will enter into the pictures. So in such a rare case, we will be swayed into giving this person a chance. Part of the reason is because of the track record of this person, just like in a grant review process. If a person traditionally has been doing great things, the chance of them completing the additional work to get the papers accepted in the paper into a journal would be greatly enhanced. So this is a very difficult question, and this is a very good question. I hope I gave you some insight on how why we would still think the single-blind process has some merit.
Thank you, Henry. That is very clear. And I would just like to add a small comment from the publisher side. Indeed, it is a decision to change a journal from single review to double blinded review, and it's actually not a decision for the publisher. We actually try to remain as neutral as possible on how peer review is done. It's not up to us to decide, but it's really to the community of researchers, to the editors of the journals, to the community at large to decide what they would like to have as a peer review process. I think you very well put the pros and cons of double-blinded peer review, and it's an ongoing discussion in the biomedical research community at large. But from our side, what we can do for you is try to provide support in experimenting with what you think is the best mode of peer review and remain neutral about it. But it's a very interesting question. And I'd just like to finish by, first of all, thank you again very much, Henry and Abe, also Sophie and James. And finally, we had a really excellent stream of questions, but we could only answer a number of them. So please stay tuned to the Biomaterials peer review room. Join if you can.
Yes.
I will pass on to Sophie so that she can wrap up. Thank you again for having joined, and have a great day.
Yes, thank you all, Abhay, Henry, and Maria. So just about the Biomaterials peer review debate room. Today's presenters will go in and respond to the questions that we haven't had a chance to address yet. So if you'd like to join us in the room, please drop me a line at globaleventslist@elsevier.com to receive an invitation, and through that invitation you can join us in the room and continue the conversation there. Again, thank you very much all, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Have a good day.